What's up, Internet? Welcome to Conversations. I'm your host, Agustin Sanchez, founder of the Photographic Journal. This week, we're talking to Joseph Haeberle, a fine art and commercial photographer dividing his time between Oregon and Los Angeles. At his heart, Joe is a storyteller, going after what most inspires him with his camera at his side. His sun-soaked images capture the classic American landscape and the hardworking people that live under its larger-than-life skies. What's up, Joe?
Hey, how are you?
Good, man. It's been a little bit. It's good to talk to you again.
Yeah, likewise. Yeah, I'm glad we got to chat.
How is everything going with work? How are you doing with the assignments that we were talking about with the New York Times?
Things are good. The New York Times, everything's kind of settled down now with that, which is good. Everything, went so smooth. Yeah, I mean, they just have such a dialed process for photographers. They have their whole freelancer system up and running, and everything's good. So once you do the assignment, you submit the images, you work with your editor, and once it's done, you don't really have to worry about anything, which is great.
And tell us a little bit about that process. You approached them with the stories that were interesting you,
right?
Where you live in Oregon.
Yeah. So that was the idea, is that this is affecting everybody, this pandemic, and I thought, I was hearing a lot of stories about how it's affecting cities because that's where it's kind of hitting the hardest for people. But what I thought was kind of interesting was that it's affecting people that live even 2.5 or 3 hours outside of a town. So people in the middle of Oregon who, they have a 2.5 hour commute just to go to the grocery store, are being affected by this, whether it's through business or whether it's through social distancing or whether it's, whatever. Because it kind of affects every facet of your life. So I just thought I would go photograph those kind of people that are the furthest out, the hardest to reach, and the most unlikely that people would think about in this sort of situation. So I thought, let's go photograph them. Let's go hear their story. And so I kind of put together a list of people, and I went out and just kind of did that. And literally as like the day before I went out, I was like, oh wait, you know what? Somebody might be interested in this story. And so I threw it out to kind of a bunch of different people, and it was awesome because one of the only people that replied was the New York Times. And so literally on my way to, I'm like driving to the first subject to photograph, I hopped on a call with the New York Times, and they were like, yeah, we're interested in this story. Just go do it. We trust you, and go ahead. And so I just went and did it. And it was about 5 days of that. What was weird is that because of the virus, I had to go to the people and come home every night. Because of social distancing, I didn't want to stay anywhere with people. I didn't want to stay at a hotel. And so I would get home really late at night and just go and do the same thing the next day. And it ended up just being this like 5-day amazing process of just go out, photograph, come home, go out, photograph, come home, and so on and so forth, which was kind of epic.
So were you coming back home late and then editing what you had captured that day in order to get it over to your editor in real time, or were you waiting the end of the 5 days in order to just send like a giant package?
My editor was really understanding of the situation because I was literally getting home at like midnight every night. Like my girlfriend would already be asleep, and I would just crash, fall into bed, and then wake up and do it again the next day. And that was really epic for me, is just to like be hustling so hard and in a time where it seems like that might not be possible. And so, just going out and photographing, doing that. My editor was really understanding. And so I just submitted a huge batch of images at the end of the 5 days.
I mean, it's interesting to me. I think that most photographers are looking at different ways that they can either capture things with no people in them so that they can, remain creative without having to interact with other people, or doing things like Zoom calls or FaceTime calls where they're like either taking screenshots or photographing things.
Mm-hmm.
You know, people are trying to find ways around things, but because you kind of live in, I mean, you don't live in an urban space. You live, you know, out on an acreage, kind of in more rural Oregon where there's less people. You can go outside and try to find these people, and the distance and, you know, remaining social is a little bit different.
Yeah. I think that's what's cool is living in a rural area. Rural people tend to like kind of stay away from each other anyways. So yeah, it kind of lended itself to the ability to just go photograph them because I could stay at a distance and I could photograph and say hi. The weird thing on the shoot was like, you know, most people in rural areas, like you shake hands when you meet. But that was a thing where we were like, we're not going to do that. We're just going to stay at a distance and photograph each other. And, you know, like if we went to different locations or whatever, I would have to hop in a different car and drive behind them. And so that was a thing. But, yeah, I think any story is going to have that human element just because of the world we're in. And so I think, I don't know, naturally I was just like, well, how can I tell the stories of these people and how can I do it in the best way possible? Because I thought that would bring the most value to the project and kind of help everybody relate to one another through the story. So that was kind of just the heart of the pitch, I guess.
That's awesome. So over the 5 days, how many people did you visit? How many stories were you able to capture?
Let me see. 7. Well, 8 if you count. There was one ranch where there were many assistants, you know, many ranch hands, a husband and wife team, and so they kind of counted as 2, I feel like, just because they had different roles and different just different jobs to do, I guess.
I mean, yeah, you were really hustling. I mean, 5 days and capturing that amount of kind of documentary work is pretty solid.
It was everything to like, you know, bands that had canceled their tours who live in rural areas, hotel owners, ranchers, farmers, you know, ranch hands on those ranches. Let me see who else there. Yeah, there was a Forest Service firefighter or retired, I guess. But yeah, it was just, I kind of wanted to keep it well-rounded. And so normally I have, you know, an agriculture based network, I guess. But I wanted to kind of branch out of that and see, you know, who can I reach in these rural areas that's not somebody that I would typically photograph.
No, that's interesting. I think that you definitely attacked the problem in a different way than a lot of people would. And I think based on your background, that makes sense, you know, and your location. What was I going to ask you? Do you think that, did you find what you were looking for? Was there anything that kind of surprised you as you went on that journey?
What surprised me is that like my favorite story ended up being my neighbor, like my closest neighbor, which
so where you had to travel the least.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, all the stories were incredible, and I kind of like, you know, learned and got to like put my hand in different pots, I guess. And yeah, I got to learn like each kind of like industry and how it's being affected. But yeah, the craziest thing was that my neighbor, who, you know, lives half a mile away from me, ended up kind of being my favorite, weirdest, most informed story. And yeah, I don't know. I just think like going and photographing him, and it really only took about 30 minutes, was epic because it was just like, hey, I'm going to hop over. I'm just going to capture who you are and what you have to say. I got to like tell him, you know, what's going on beforehand over the phone. And then I just got to go like do it. And then just like doing it purified with this one person. And yeah, I don't know. It turned into just like a really cool part of the story that I'm really proud of. So
I think that sometimes you're going to research, you're going to do everything that you need to do to kind of get mentally and physically prepared for whatever
Sure.
you're sort of planning. But some of the joy in that process is things that happen that keep you on your toes, things that surprise you, where you walk into, chatting with somebody or taking photos, and the person that it's not that you brushed them off, but maybe, you just had sort of normal expectations for, end up being amazing.
Yeah.
Right. And sometimes the people that you think are going to be amazing, I think because the expectations there, it might fall flat in your head.
I think that's what I love so much about documentary work, is that no matter, how much sleep you get the night before, no matter how much preparation you do researching the industry, no matter how well you prep your camera gear, there's always going to be something that kind of pops up. There's always going to be something different that you don't expect. And I just think that, like, by allowing that story to unfold, you're allowing yourself up to creatively expand into whatever you're creating, because it's so unexpected and you just have to, like, hop on and hold on, Yeah, exactly. Totally. And if you can kind of do that and photograph what's going on there and then, even if it's unexpected, then you're in for a wild ride, and, like, you're probably going to get something wildly different than what you were expecting.
That's interesting. There's a quote that I like captured from our last conversation. You said something to the effect of, focus on the stories you want to tell. If you're concentrating on just being a photographer, you're focusing on the wrong place. Can you tell me a little bit about that mindset?
Yeah, I think for me that manifests, like, I grew up with horses, right? So that's just a passion that I've had since I was 2 years old. That's just something I've loved. And whether that's skateboarding for somebody, or, whatever, whether it's working on cars or whether it's surfing, or, anything, it's just something I wanted to do anyways. And so by adding the element of photography into it, by wanting to, like, create from it through a photographic medium, I could draw a passion from photographing that. And I think that if you just go into it saying, oh, I want to be a photographer, but you don't have any, like, context behind that, you're going to go make some really cool pictures, but you're let me redo this question, I guess.
No. I like where you're going. I think that what you're saying is, if you use your passion as a bridge to get to a story, it's going to feel honest and genuine.
Absolutely.
If you're just going out for an image, then that's cool. You're going to make a nice image. It probably won't feel as authentic or be as impactful, because your passion won't be as ingrained into the work.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think it all goes back to that quote from David Allen Harvey, where he says, if you want to play the guitar, you can learn everybody else's songs right away. But at some point, you're going to want to write your own song and have your own words and have your own melody. And so, if you see a bunch of photographers and they're photographing mountains and they're photographing camping and they're photographing skiing, you can really want to go do that. But if camping and skiing aren't in your heart, then it's not your own song per se. And if you want to go write your own song, you have to find your own passion, and go photograph that. And that has nothing to do with photography, really. Like, what you love has nothing to do with photography. If photography is what you love, that's great. But there has to be something else that you love and that you're passionate about to go photograph, I think, especially if you want to be, in the storytelling realm.
I think that makes sense. I think that especially now, what comes to mind immediately as you say that is the idea of, like, social media and Instagram and, prior Flickr, where you have people that, rise to the top because their work's fantastic and they have that passion for whatever they're photographing. But then you also get people that they distill that person's photography down to kind of like a formula. It works because a ton of people are going to like that. And there's nothing wrong with them doing that. Especially if it's coming from a genuine place and there's sort of lifestyle behind that. But, as you said with the quote, I think that you have to be genuine to yourself and not just emulating what you see.
Yeah. And I think there's ways, you can take that inspiration and apply it to your own work. Let's just say you wanted to take just the black and white aspect of applying to your own project, or let's just say you wanted to photograph, railroad workers before 10 a.m. because that might be different than how they are after 10 a.m. It could kind of be anything, and you can take that inspiration. You can say, okay, I'm just going to apply this to my own work and my own passion. And I think those are like really good ways to find your own inspiration. But eventually you're just going to have this idea where you're like, I want to go photograph X and Y and with these variables, and just kind of change it up and just see what happens. And I think that's like kind of how you get to your own song, if that makes sense.
So with you working on your own song and your own style, you've been working commercially, I think, with a lot of brands that feel genuine to you. You're working with Stetson and Filson and Wrangler, like a lot of these American sort of workwear brands.
Yeah.
Did that happen naturally for you? Did you just start photographing those things and then sending them out? How did that happen?
Well, so photography started out for me, kind of for a lot of people, it was very similar. So I started just taking pictures, and then somebody noticed. And when I was 17, I was getting hired for, senior portraits, weddings. And I did that for a few years. And then I kind of found out, I don't really care about weddings all that much. And that might sound like a kind of rude thing to say, but I'm not the guy that's like interested in what wedding dress you're wearing. And I had to be honest with myself about that. And that truth opened itself up to like, okay, well, what do I want to go photograph? And so I still didn't know. And I moved to Seattle, and I said, I'm just going to go be this like outdoor adventure photographer. And so I went and photographed, sleeping bags and tents and, backpacking stoves and stuff like that. And I photographed people in like crazy places with them. And it was awesome, but I still kept like coming back to the realization that like, that wasn't really me. Like, that's not what really inspired me. Even though I like that stuff. I love backpacking. I love getting into the mountains, but it didn't like spark that fire inside of me. So I don't know. I just kind of quit. I just said, I can't do this. I need to just quit photography for a bit. And so I moved back to a ranch in Colorado, and I just started working as a ranch hand for a little bit. And after a few months of that, I started taking my camera out and just photographing, what was around me. And that was, being a ranch hand was inspiring to me. And you wake up at sunrise every day and you go to bed after sunset every day. And so you see sunrise and sunset, and you see these like horses, and you see the cows, and you see the wide open landscapes, and you're like, I want to go photograph that. And so I would get my camera after a few months, and I would just take a few pictures here and there. And then I started posting them. And I think my passion and just what I was doing came out to, whoever I was posting to. And then people started hiring me based off of that. So that's kind of how I realized, like my passion of agriculture can be tied to my passion of photography. And so I just started kind of doing that, and that kind of led me to where I am now, photographing for, Wrangler, Stetson, Filson, those brands that have a stake in that industry, I suppose. And the stories that I would photograph were never like, oh, I want to go photograph for Filson. This would be great for Filson. It was like, here's the story I want to photograph. Who does this work for? Who would this be beneficial for? What brand would this benefit? And
what I find interesting is all those brands have a very honest voice to them. I think that your work lends itself perfectly to all of them, which is why you're working with them, right?
Thank you.
And it makes sense that you don't have somebody, you're not going out and saying, I'm going to pitch Filson on this one and Wrangler. You're just going out and trying to capture the stories you want to capture and see if anyone's interested, right? Like you probably would be doing these things anyways.
Totally.
To a certain extent.
Yeah. I think those stories, like I would go photograph them anyways. It's just like how it was in the New York Times situation where I was just like, I need to go just capture that story. And if it just lives on my hard drive, that is totally fine with me. That's totally all right. Obviously I want to like, pay some bills and get those stories out though. I want to have them on a platform where people can tell their story. And I thought that was important with like the New York Times, like going out and telling the stories of people whose stories would never be heard before. And so, yeah, going out and getting those stories is something that's just essential to me. Like, that's just like, oh, I have that idea. I have to go do it. I have to pursue that. And it makes sense for brands, which is very lucky for me. But I think anybody who's following their passion, whether it's, fly fishing or whether it's, the fucking Smurfs, they're going to find somebody that wants to hear that story or wants to hear what they're saying somehow. And that's just going to come along in a very organic and genuine way, which I think everybody should adhere to. I don't know. I guess anybody who doesn't follow what I say isn't perfect, but I think
audience, listen to Joe. He knows what he's talking about. And if you don't, it's okay.
It's okay.
We still love you.
It's okay. Yeah. This is my 2 cents. But, if you adhere what you love to your work, that's going to pay off so much in the long term. I'm sure that if I went to school to be a lawyer, I could make a lot of money and I could be really happy in 10 years. But in 15 years or 20 years, I might crash because I don't care about law. Like it's just not my thing. And it's the same idea with photography where I have this passion and I have something that I love and I know that I'm going to love because I've loved it my whole life. And so I'm going to go down that road with photography to create work around that. And in 20 years, like it might not make me money in the short term. It might not bring me mega success in the short term, whatever. But in the long term, I'm going to be happy because I've created stories that I've wanted to tell forever, that have been inside me forever, and that that I care about. I think about telling my kids someday, I'm only 25. So in 20, 25 years, when my kids can kind of understand where I'm coming from, when I tell them what I was doing at this age, I want to say that it was something I was passionate about and it was something I cared about deeply. And so I'm just doing that through storytelling, I guess.
No, I think that I resonate personally with that a lot. I think that you have to be true to yourself and living your life with passion for whatever you're doing with your life makes a lot of sense to me. But I have a 4-year-old daughter. I'm, almost 40. I'm an old man. I'm gray and old and grizzled. I'm not. I feel like I'm 22, but
you don't look like it at all.
It's one of those things where before I had my daughter, I wanted her to be proud of me. I wanted to make decisions and live my life in a way that was true to me. So I definitely resonate with that. And I still, to this day now, I want her to, understand that, yeah, when you were 4, this is what I was doing. And I was pursuing my passions in this way. And this is how I was sort of taking the world in and spitting it back out. And I think that's a really important thing to try and understand for yourself and to try and teach, to the next generation, even though they might not understand it. But
totally.
Yeah, the headspace is really cool to me. So that makes sense.
It is. And I think, especially as men of our generation, we're maybe encouraged to not choose passion. Maybe we're encouraged not to choose emotion and what really strikes us. I think to do that as men and come together and like accept emotions we have and accept passions that we have and focus on that is a really special thing, because I don't think it's happened very much in past generations. I think, 50 years ago, I probably would have, been a construction worker, or I would have done something that I wasn't passionate about because that's what mattered as a man. But I think to choose passion and to choose something that you can share with your children, and you're thinking about family and the people in your life, is a very special thing that we're privileged to do in this time.
I think that makes sense. So I grew up in San Francisco. So I grew up in a very different construct than you did. I was told do almost to a reckless abandon, right? Like do what you want, do what makes you not necessarily feel good, but what you're passionate about. I, found music early on. I always drew things. So I was always artistic. So the construct of what a man was probably a little bit different for me in such a sort of progressive and liberal city. But I also grew up Catholic and, kind of conservative framework. So I do still understand what you mean. There's certain expectations that are set that you're finding your own way on. I think that you're right. We're fortunate to live in a time where you don't feel as squashed into fitting a a square peg into a round hole.
Yeah, I mean, I guess when I just think about, my dreams and aspirations of being a cowboy who also takes pretty pictures and shares stories, like that's not a extremely masculine thing, at least where I'm from. I think, in ranching, you would be encouraged to not pursue creativity. You'd be encouraged to go do the fucking work. You know what I mean? Go do the brunt work. And I think,
but you're kind of approaching your photography with that mindset. So it's interesting. You're kind of finding a bridge between where you're coming from with that passion to create and tell stories and be artistic.
Well, I think we're all humans, right? Like whether you're a rancher or whether you work in tech in San Francisco, you have emotion. And so I kind of try to photograph the emotion in places that try to shut it out, because no matter how hard you try, it's there. And so to photograph ranchers who care so deeply about the earth they're on, and that care so deeply about the animals they raise, and to find that story and that emotion and that feeling, I think is a really special opportunity that I have to go and document, just because everybody's encouraged to not have those things in this world. And so I don't know, just finding that just seems like a really special opportunity, I guess.
It's one of those things where you are, what's the best way to put it? You're sort of exposing a truth that's totally there, but that people aren't always comfortable with sharing. And you're probably doing it in a way where, because you come from more of that world, they're more willing to share it with you.
Yeah.
And I think that exposing that truth is really interesting. I think that one thing I was going to ask you was, as you're doing some of this documentary work for a brand, that means one thing, because you're speaking to a similar crowd, right? The person that is either going to view marketing materials or visit blogs for Filson or Wrangler are one person, whereas the person that reads the New York Times, that's a whole different swab of people.
Yeah, I think the power of photography has the ability to tell the truth, no matter what that is. And I've always been into finding the stories that everybody's not looking at, everybody's not really paying attention to. And so to find the truth that, even this rancher who like denies sickness, or, thinks he's like invincible out in the middle of nowhere is also dealing with this. I think that truth can be relatable to somebody who might be sitting in New York or LA in their apartment, you know, just, I don't know. I think there's a level of empathy there that anybody can have as humans, and storytelling can kind of bridge that gap.
Now that's definitely a beautiful sentiment. I think that the state of being human is less complex than people give it credit for. I think that we're more the same than we're different, and I really try to live my life like that.
Absolutely.
So you mentioned David Allen Harvey earlier. Is that one of the source of inspiration for where you started, for what you were trying to do?
When I heard that, when I heard his quote that I mentioned earlier, I was like, yeah, I wanna play his songs. You know what I mean? But eventually, I learned. I went to Cuba, and I learned that no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't photograph Cuba like David photographs Cuba, because I'm not David. I can photograph it like Joe photographs it because I'm Joe. And so through that, I kind of learned, and through that inspiration, and through trying to put his perspective into my lens, I kind of learned what my voice was, I guess. And so yeah, he's a huge inspiration to me. Absolutely. I think his level of storytelling and the way he aims to just like capture the beauty in any simple moment is, I just think that sentiment itself is very beautiful, and I want to like emulate that. But my realization through David was that I have to do it on my own terms. I have to do it in my own way.
So for you, it's more that David's ethos and the way that he approached things is inspiring in the kernel of where you want to go, less so that you're trying to emulate his style or his approach or what he would have done.
Yeah. There's like photographers that want to create the same shot that another photographer has, and that can like be seen in like Yosemite. Everybody wants that epic Yosemite picture, through the valley with the cliffs and everything. But I think it's important to just want to like go out and make your own pictures too, and have your own moments and document that. Like that's humanity in itself, is just creating art out of the emotions and experiences you have.
I had a chat with Italian photographer Federica Belli, and she had a really interesting quote about wherever people were looking. If you have, 1,000 people looking one way, point your camera the other. You're going to find a better story there. And you've kind of echoed that along, our chat today a couple different times, where, it's about exposing your own truth and not necessarily what everyone else is doing.
Yeah. Nobody will be experiencing the emotion that you have in any given moment. Like you could be standing in a group of 10 people, some crazy thing could happen 50 yards away, and each person, I really believe, is going to have a slightly, at least slightly different reaction to that. And being able to figure out what that is and point yourself in the right direction, whether it's what everybody else is looking at or what they're not looking at, is a way to host creativity within yourself, because you're allowing yourself to look at, okay, but what happened behind that group of 10 people? What story is there that nobody's talking about? I think it's just, there's a lot of, there's just so many different stories out there, you know. There's no reason why anybody should not go. I don't know. I don't know how to answer that question, I guess.
No, but I kind of get what you're saying. Like,
I don't know.
There's so many good stories out there, and there's so many ways to connect with people that unless you are practicing sort of the craft of photography, there's no reason for you to go and take the same shot that somebody else did. Like, and I know what you're talking about. Like, everyone has that shot of like Dumbo in Brooklyn, you know, looking out over the Brooklyn Bridge, or that Yosemite shot. There's certain shots that I think that everyone thinks that they want, but at the end of the day, the shots that probably my kid's going to look at in 20 years and be like, damn, my dad knew how to take a photo, isn't going to be that shot. It's going to be something that I wouldn't have expected and that was probably more genuine.
Yeah, I mean, you're not putting your heart and passion into something that you're just trying to recreate, you know. You're putting your heart and passion into the rest of your life, but you're looking at this point in your life, whether it's, that San Francisco, the Golden Gate Bridge, or whether it's the Brooklyn Bridge in New York, or whether it's Yosemite, you're not allowing your like heart and soul to thrive in that situation. You might be in the rest of your life, and so by turning the lens on the rest of your life, you might end up taking a photo that's way more special to you because it's a moment that meant something to you, or meant something to your kids, or meant something to your friends, or meant something to some other person out there that might be experiencing what's going on in that photograph. Or might relate in some way.
So in that, when I look through your portfolio, most of your portfolio is, North America, kind of like you said, cowboy with a camera. I think that's a perfect way to describe most of your portfolio.
Sure.
But there's an Africa trip that's in there, and then this Cuba trip that you're talking about that actually, I think because they don't necessarily fit the narrative, but are treated as genuinely and as beautifully, really appealed to me personally. Like I saw that Africa trip on your portfolio and I was like, holy shitballs. Like, this is awesome. How did you end up over in Africa?
I had some friends that started a nonprofit. I want to say 5 or 6 years ago. And the nonprofit was just based around creating content for other nonprofits that, might not have the budget to put photos and video and a website together. And so we would just go do that for them. And it'd be, we'd gather 15 people. We'd go to a city. We'd pick 3 or 4 nonprofits, and then we'd just like hustle it out in an Airbnb and make it for them, all out of our own pocket. And 2 of the founders of that nonprofit messaged me and were like, hey, do you want to come to Africa with us? We're just going to do kind of the same thing for a children's home in Africa. And so obviously I was like, yeah, I'm going to go over there. And so we went over there and we just started like photographing the stories that were there, especially trying to avoid the white savior part of it all, trying to like not take pictures of the kids with us, not trying to like take selfies with the kids, all that sort of stuff. And, definitely just not trying to make it about us. We wanted to photograph the authenticity and the realness that was this nonprofit that helped these kids become, members of their society over there and contributing partners with the rest of their humanity there. So just to go over there and capture that story, I think is what led to the beauty in it. And also what led to the beauty in it is that like I had, from my, moving to Seattle, moving back to Colorado, moving back to Wyoming, I recognized the beauty that was already around me that I had once like abandoned, I guess. And so once I could recognize that beauty, I could see it in a different light. And so going over to Kenya, I could go there and sort of apply the same mindset of like, I can go somewhere, see beauty in a thing, and then photograph it because I was able to see beauty in the thing that I didn't want to see it in, 5 years previously.
Mm-hmm. It's funny. I think of it kind of like when you read a book. I read Catcher in the Rye when I was 14. It meant one thing entirely to me than when I read it at 19. Mm-hmm. I reread it at 30 and I'm probably due again. And each time, because of my life experience, I was able to take something different away from that story. And I think that places are similar. You can visit a place at 19 and it's going to mean something very different to you than it would now.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that comes with just being present and just enjoying that moment of where you're at. There was this moment of like, so the other two people that went with me, they're both photographers as well, and they were there taking photos and video as well. But there was a moment where all the kids in the children's home went and jumped in this lake and just started like splashing around and having such a fun time with each other. And I was the one to jump in the water, I think, because, I was just the youngest and most naive. And I just jumped in the water with my camera and started photographing these kids in the water because it was just, it was just like a moment where I was just like, fuck it, I'm just going to go do it. Why not? And, I don't know if the other two would have or not, but I just thought, yeah, that's kind of like a moment where now that I'm 25, I might have gone, oh, well, my camera equipment like might get broke. Like, I don't know if that's like such a smart move, but fuck it, I don't know.
But are some of those shots like your favorite from the trip?
Yeah, absolutely. I think like even the photos I took on my iPhone during that moment were like some of my favorite because I just couldn't stop taking. It was like one of those moments where you're just like, I can't stop taking photos. Like this is like pure joy. It doesn't matter what the light is. It doesn't matter what the background is. I just got to take photos of like what's going on right now and get in there as much as possible.
I think that there's a lot of joy and beauty in that part of the world in a very sort of raw state.
Yeah, I think like me being, a blonde, blue-eyed white guy from Wyoming, going to Kenya and experiencing that like difference just in culture or being was like, I mean, as anybody who's experienced it, it's life-changing. And just to like see that, like they just operate on a different level than what we do here in the US. Like it's a different culture. It's a different way of living. And so just to go there, experience that, and somehow try to capture it with a camera is like, I don't know, it's beyond crazy. It's amazing.
No, and I think you approached it the right way. I did some design work at a previous job with a nonprofit that was called Pencils of Promise. And, it's very much the same intent where you are helping somebody help themselves. It isn't about an outsider coming in and fixing a problem. It's about giving the people the support to help themselves so that it lasts generations and not just you being there and then you leave and everything, falls apart.
Yeah. I mean, we showed up and like, not only did we take photos, but we wanted to show them like, okay, how can you show your stakeholders what you're doing? Whether that's through Instagram or whether that's through your website, how can you show them like the impact you're having? Because like, naturally telling those stories, I think, gains more interest for long-term value. And in the work they were doing, making members of their society more efficient and making them smarter and helping them be, just better people for those around them. It's like, it inspired me to do the same thing. And it was like, how can these photos help people live on forever? And so one of the things we did, one of the things, my friend Wynn, who came with me on the trip, he brought, I think 20 Instax cameras and a shit ton of film for him. And we just gave all the cameras to the kids at the children's home, and just let them like fly through the film as fast as they could, whatever they wanted to take pictures of. And what they ended up taking pictures of, like overwhelmingly, like I would say like 99.9% was them with their friends. They would photograph themselves with their friends, because people in those places don't have, the opportunity to just take a photo on an iPhone and see it right away. That Polaroid or that Instax, whatever, might be the only photo they have of themselves for the next year. And I think just by allowing that to happen, allowing them to take their own photo and to like let them hold on to that, helped their spirit kind of live on a little bit, because they got to like reflect on that moment, whereas they don't get to every now and then. They don't get to every day with their iPhone. They don't get to take a photo whenever they want. So to be able to like hold and like possess that photo and look back on it, I think kind of helped them. I don't even know if it helped them, but maybe it just allowed them to like revisit that moment.
Well, it's interesting because it's a new experience for them, but it's also a new experience for you. I think that it's very easy to get wrapped up for us, to get wrapped up in like this Western culture with like the immediacy of our cell phones and digital cameras and Instagram and mass media, where we can literally, I'm a little bit older than you. So I remember a time when there was only like 6 channels, and when, my grandma still had a rotary phone in the house. Mm-hmm. And now it's like, I don't even, like, I know my wife's phone number, but literally I don't know my mom's phone number. I don't know my dad's. Everything's dialed in, right? Everything is just, I stored it once, it's there in the cloud. It's just sort of, you've offloaded the things that were important 20 years ago into a data bank that's stored on 20 different servers around the United States.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter. And it's just a different viewpoint in life. And that's one of the beautiful things about travel, is you get to experience that sort of human condition that we were talking about in a different way, where people aren't that different. It's more that their situation's different and their experiences are different, but we probably would have reacted the same had we been in those situations. And that's where, the empathy and understanding sort of starts breaking down barriers.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, I agree with that completely. Yeah. It's crazy how, now we have so much information at our fingertips that we don't need to memorize each other's phone numbers.
Okay. So in an attempt to start to wrap up.
Sure.
I think, I've talked to a lot of different people through my course of interviewing people with the Photographic Journal and, this podcast series so far. And you're the first person that, number one, has a bucket list listed on their website, number one. And number two, you're the only person I've ever seen that has, in your finished bucket list versus your unfinished, there's, let's say 30 items in the finished bucket list and like 8 in the unfinished.
I think that mostly comes from me just doing things and being like, I'm so glad I fucking did that, Yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off about. Yeah.
No. It's perfect. I think that's in the spirit of who you are, and I applaud it. I think it's awesome. I read through these, and I think that your personality comes across in the website, which is great. I think some people are afraid to be themselves, and that's more of what I take away from your entire portfolio, our conversation, and your website, is that you are who you are, and that's not going to change. And that to me is me slow clapping in the back of the theater going, hell yeah, Joe.
It's not my choice. That's the cool thing.
No, yeah. So of those things, what do you think are the, I don't know, one or two that are your favorites from that bucket list you've done so far?
Let me look. The first one and the last one. It would ride a bronc in a rodeo in Wyoming. That's definitely a bucket list. I think everybody should do it. But that was another one of those things where it was just I did it and I was like, hey, I just crossed another thing off my bucket list. It was just kind of a stupid idea, and I signed up for it the day before, and it happened in 8 seconds, and it was the most glorious, craziest, fucking gnarliest 8 seconds of my life, and I loved it. And I got off, and I was just holy cow, I can't believe I just did that. And then the last thing on the list is raise a horse for 100 miles. That comes from my childhood, of which I didn't know that I was lucky enough to have. My parents raced horses, and through just having horses, we found endurance racing, which is 50 or 100 mile races. And so on my horse, I would do these races of just going up into the mountains and coming back down out of the mountains and doing 100 miles in a day, or in 14 hours once. And it was, I think that's the craziest thing that I look back on. And I'm just I had no clue what was happening. I had no clue how amazing and epic it was, and how lucky I was to have those moments. But that's definitely bucket list, and I'm so glad I did it. So happy I did it.
Everyone's got their weird little thing that they've done that they're proud of.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of the beauty of what we're all going after, whether it's, with photography or with something else.
Yeah, it's that thing of we're all kind of doing our own thing. We all have our own passion that we don't realize is our passion, and that we don't even, pay attention to really, because we've just been doing it for years, or we just, it's just normal to us. And I think we just all have that thing. We all have that little bit of this is what I love doing, and that nobody would expect that I love doing, or nobody would expect even exists. And it doesn't have to be, something as crazy as horse racing, but everybody has that little thing they enjoy. Everybody has that little spark in their life. And I don't know, applying that to photography can be so incredible, because it allows people to see into your side of the world and your vision of the world. And I just think that's a beautiful thing.
Conversations is available on all major podcast platforms. Like this episode, subscribe and rate us on iTunes. We promise we'll give you a hug if we ever see you in the real world, or at least a high five. Visit us at the Photographic Journal for our latest interviews, photo essays, and features. Want even more? Follow us on Instagram at TPJ.